Emily Winters never imagined her life would unravel so suddenly. At just 16, she thought she understood what it meant to belong, to be part of a family that would support her no matter what. But that evening, as her mother's harsh words rang in her ears, the reality of her situation hit her hard. "You're nothing but a burden on this family," Sarah had screamed, her face contorted in anger. Emily could hardly process the words. She stood frozen at the doorstep, clutching her duffel bag, feeling as though the world was crumbling around her. Her father, John, stood silently beside Sarah, offering no comfort, no explanation. The night had started like any other. The family sat around the dinner table, tensions simmering beneath the surface. Emily, desperate to gain her parents' approval, had tried to hold the conversation together. Her mother, who was always so critical, had found something, again, to criticize. This time, it was Emily's grades, which, despite her best efforts, never seemed to be good enough. She had spent hours studying for her finals, but it didn't matter. Nothing ever did. And then, it had all spiraled out of control. Her mother had lashed out, calling Emily lazy and irresponsible. The argument escalated quickly, and Emily, unable to hold back her tears, blurted out the truth: she was pregnant. Her heart raced, expecting some form of relief, but instead, her mother's eyes darkened with fury. "You've ruined everything," Sarah had hissed, turning away from Emily as if she were a stranger. Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at her father. But John remained silent, his gaze focused on his plate. For the first time, Emily realized that her father was just as emotionally distant as her mother, offering no support, no understanding. The weight of the moment crushed her. Emily had always believed her family would be there for her, especially in a time of crisis. Instead, they had turned their backs on her, leaving her standing on the doorstep, an overwhelming sense of isolation filling her chest. "You're on your own now," her mother had muttered before slamming the door in Emily's face. Frozen in shock, Emily turned around, stepping into the cold night. The streetlights flickered above, but there was no warmth, no comfort in the world around her. She was alone. Her mind raced. How could everything change so quickly? What was she supposed to do now? Her mind kept circling back to one painful truth: she was pregnant, abandoned, and with no idea where to go. The decision was made for her. Emily couldn't stay there. The place that was supposed to feel like home had rejected her, and she had nowhere else to turn. She walked aimlessly, her feet carrying her further from the house, further from everything she knew. Her emotions were a blur of confusion, fear, and anger. As she walked past the familiar streets, all she could think about was the life growing inside her, the child who, just like her, would face rejection from the people they should have been able to rely on. Hours later, Emily found herself at a small, run-down women's shelter called St. James House. The building was old, but it was a refuge for women like her, women who had nowhere to go. As she stepped inside, the warmth of the room hit her, but it did little to comfort the cold ache in her heart. The shelter was crowded, filled with women from all walks of life. Some were homeless, some had fled abusive relationships, and some, like Emily, had nowhere else to turn. It wasn't much, but for the first time that night, Emily felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone, not anymore. She found a small cot in the corner of the room and sat down, her hands trembling as she placed her bag beside her. She had no plan, no idea how she would survive this, but for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. Her thoughts returned to her family, to the way her parents had rejected her. She hated them for what they'd done, but deep down, she was still terrified of what would happen next. What would her life look like now? She had no idea. But in that moment, she knew one thing for certain: she would not let her child face the same fate. She would find a way to make this work. She had to. Emily sat on the small cot, her mind racing. The room around her was quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of feet and the soft murmurs of women talking in the corners. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her a chance to breathe, to think, and perhaps to start over. The reality of her situation settled in more heavily as she ran her fingers over the frayed edges of the blanket that covered her legs. She was 16, pregnant, and homeless. Her parents had abandoned her. Her future was uncertain, and yet, despite the overwhelming circumstances, Emily could feel something stir within her. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was determination. She had to keep moving forward. The shelter wasn't far from the edge of town, tucked between a row of rundown apartments and a boarded-up storefront. The area was quiet, though not particularly safe. But Emily couldn't afford to be picky. For the first time, she felt a pang of gratitude for the kindness of the shelter's volunteers. They had offered her a meal, clean sheets, and a place to sleep. Small comforts, but they meant the world to her right now. Her thoughts kept returning to the argument she had with her mother. Sarah's face had twisted with disgust, her words like daggers. "I never wanted you," she had said, before turning her back. Emily's heart still stung from the cruelty, but the anger that had initially bubbled up inside her was fading, replaced by a dull ache. It was hard to reconcile the mother she had known with the woman who had cast her aside so easily. Sarah had never been the most nurturing, but this was something else entirely. Emily's mind wandered to her father, John. She had always sought his approval, but he had never been particularly involved in her life. He was always too busy with work, too distant to offer much beyond the occasional pat on the back for good grades or a birthday card. Even now, standing in the background during the argument, he hadn't said a word. How could he just stand there and let her mother tear her apart? It was as if he didn't care at all. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She couldn't afford to break down. Not here, not now. Emily knew that crying wouldn't change anything. She had to stay strong for herself, for her baby. The next few days at the shelter passed in a blur. Emily spent her time trying to adjust to her new life, learning the routines of the shelter, and slowly getting to know the other women. Some of them were older, mothers with young children, while others were like her, teenagers who had nowhere else to go. They all had their stories, their struggles, but they didn't ask Emily about hers. In a way, it felt like a relief. She didn't have to explain herself to anyone. She could just exist here, quietly, without fear of judgment. Emily had always been a good student, and despite the chaos of her home life, she had always kept her grades up. But now, school seemed like a distant memory. She couldn't imagine going back to a classroom, sitting in a desk, pretending everything was normal. The thought of seeing her classmates, especially her friends, filled her with dread. They didn't know what had happened, didn't know about the pregnancy, and she wasn't sure she could face them. But she had no choice. She had to finish her high school education, if only for her child's future. One afternoon, while she was sitting in the shelter's common room, a woman named Sarah came over to her. She was a few years older than Emily, with kind eyes and a soft voice. Sarah had been staying at the shelter for a while and had taken it upon herself to help the newcomers. "How are you doing, hon?" Sarah asked, sitting beside her. Emily hesitated before answering. I don't know. It's all so overwhelming." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "I know the feeling. When I first came here, I felt like my world had fallen apart. But this place, it's a start. You're safe now. That's the most important thing." "I guess so," Emily replied quietly, staring down at her hands. "I just don't know what to do. I'm not ready for this. I don't know how I'm going to be a mom." "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Sarah said softly. "You just need to take it one day at a time. I've seen women come through here, women who thought they couldn't make it, but they did. You'll figure it out. And we'll help you." Emily looked up, meeting Sarah's gaze. There was sincerity in her eyes, something that made Emily believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be okay. It was hard to accept, but she had to trust that there was a path forward. "I hope so," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. That evening, Emily received a surprise visitor. The shelter director, a woman named Mrs. Harris, came to find her. She was tall and in her early 40s, with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude. Mrs. Harris explained that a local clinic had been in contact with the shelter, offering free prenatal care for any of the women who needed it. The offer came at just the right time. Emily's pregnancy was still early, and she hadn't yet seen a doctor. "Are you interested?" Mrs. Harris asked. Emily hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take that step. She hadn't even fully processed the reality of being pregnant, let alone what it meant to see a doctor. I don't know," Emily admitted. "Think it over," Mrs. Harris said. "The clinic's a good place. It's run by professionals, and it'll give you the care you need to make sure you and your baby are healthy. You don't have to decide right now, but it's there if you want it." That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The decision seemed so small in the grand scheme of things, but it was one of the first real choices she had made for herself since leaving home. She had never felt more alone, but for the first time, she didn't feel completely lost. She could still choose her path. She had come to the shelter to escape the suffocating grip of her family's rejection. But as she lay there, Emily realized that this was the first step toward finding herself. The future wasn't certain, but at least it was hers to shape. Emily spent the next few days in a daze. The shelter had become her routine, a place of both comfort and discomfort. She had learned to wake up early, shower in the shared bathrooms, and eat whatever meals were served. It wasn't much, but it was enough to survive. Each day felt like a repetitive blur, but she was slowly becoming accustomed to the small moments of peace, the quiet mornings when she could sip coffee in silence, the brief interactions with the other women that reminded her she wasn't completely alone. But there was one thought that haunted her, a thought that refused to leave her mind. It was about her family. Specifically, her father. She had expected him to step in, to try to fix things or at least offer some support. Instead, he had stood by as her mother had rejected her. The more she thought about it, the more bitter she felt. She had tried so hard to please them, to make them proud. But in the end, they had only torn her down. She was angry. Angry at her mother for the cruel words, angry at her father for his silence, angry at herself for ever thinking they cared. But as time passed, the anger began to shift. It wasn't that she had forgiven them, it was that she was starting to let go. She couldn't control how they treated her, but she could control how she moved forward. One afternoon, Emily was in the common room, sitting with Sarah, when a woman in her late 30s entered the shelter. She had long brown hair tied back into a ponytail, and she wore a businesslike jacket over a pair of jeans. She looked out of place in the shabby surroundings of the shelter, but she walked with an air of purpose. Her eyes scanned the room, then fixed on Emily. "Emily Miller?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Emily felt her heart skip a beat. "Yes?" she replied, confused. The woman smiled gently. "I'm Rebecca Anderson. I am here to speak with you." "About what?" Emily asked, her mind racing. Rebecca stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm a lawyer. Your father, John Miller, contacted me. He wants to meet with you." Emily froze. Her mind couldn't process what she was hearing. Her father had contacted a lawyer? Why? Was it about the pregnancy? Or was it just some legal formality he wanted to handle? It didn't make sense. "I don't understand," Emily said, her voice shaky. I thought he didn't care." Rebecca took a seat next to Emily, her expression warm but serious. "I know this is a lot to take in. Your father has been trying to reach you. He was hurt by the way things happened, but he wants to make things right." Emily's stomach twisted. Her father wanted to make things right? After everything that had happened? After the way he had just stood there and let her mother treat her like dirt? "Why now?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't he do anything before?" Rebecca sighed, her gaze sympathetic. "He didn't know how to approach you. He wasn't sure what to say or how to fix things. But he's been struggling with the idea of losing you. He doesn't want to lose his daughter." Emily's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to scream, to tell Rebecca that it was too late. But another part of her, one that she didn't want to admit even to herself, was desperate for some kind of validation. She didn't know how to process what was happening. The hurt and betrayal were still fresh, but so was the longing to have her father in her life, even if it was too late. Is he really sorry?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Rebecca nodded. "Yes, Emily. He is. He wants to make amends. He's not asking you to forgive him right away, but he wants to talk to you, to listen to you." The weight of the moment hung in the air. Emily felt like she was being pulled in two directions. One part of her wanted to close the door on her father forever, to protect herself from any more hurt. But the other part of her, a part she had buried deep inside, wanted to believe that he could change, that he could be the father she had always needed him to be. "I don't know what to do," Emily admitted, her voice small. "You don't have to decide right away," Rebecca said gently. "But you should know that your father is waiting for you. He's ready to listen, and he's ready to make things right. But it's up to you." As Rebecca left, Emily sat there, her hands trembling in her lap. She felt the storm of emotions rage inside her: anger, confusion, sadness, and hope. It was too much for her to process in one sitting, but she couldn't deny that the offer felt like a lifeline, even if she didn't know if she was ready to take it. Later that night, Emily found herself walking outside the shelter. The cool night air bit at her skin, but it didn't matter. She needed to clear her head. She walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, passing empty streets and darkened storefronts. The city felt so distant, so cold, yet so full of possibilities. What was she supposed to do? Could she really let her father back into her life after everything? Could she allow herself to trust him again? She didn't have the answers, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control. She wasn't sure where the path would lead, but she knew she couldn't keep running from the pain. If she was going to move forward, she had to face the past. She had to make a decision about her father. But one thing was certain: no matter what happened, she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel small again. The next few days passed in a haze for Emily. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Rebecca. It lingered in her mind like a whisper she couldn't escape. Her father, John Miller, wanted to make things right. The very thought felt like a heavy burden pressing against her chest. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she was better off without him. But now, the walls felt fragile, as though they were crumbling bit by bit. The shelter had become a safe place, but Emily couldn't stay in this bubble forever. The harsh realities of life outside these walls loomed over her like a storm. The pregnancy, the broken relationship with her mother, and the looming possibility of reconciliation with her father, everything felt like too much to handle at once. She sat in the common room one morning, sipping on a cup of coffee, when Sarah walked in. Sarah had become a quiet confidant over the last few days. She had been in and out of shelters for years, but there was something about her calm demeanor that made Emily feel like she wasn't alone. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" Sarah asked, sitting beside her. Emily shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't even know if I want to see him. After everything that happened, it's hard to even think about trusting him again." Sarah nodded, understanding. "I get it. You've been through a lot. But think about it, if he really wants to make things right, maybe it's worth hearing him out." Emily stared down into her cup, watching the steam rise from the coffee. "It's just. He was so silent when it mattered the most. When Mom was tearing me apart, he just stood there. He didn't say anything." "I get that," Sarah said softly. "But sometimes people don't know how to react. Maybe he didn't know what to say, and maybe he's feeling guilty for not stepping in sooner." "I don't know if I can forgive him for that," Emily whispered. "I'm not saying you have to forgive him right away," Sarah replied. "But maybe you can give him a chance to explain. You might be surprised at what you hear." Emily didn't respond. She wasn't sure if Sarah's words made any difference. All she could think about was the fact that her father had let her down in the worst way. Could he really change? Could she really let him back into her life after everything? That afternoon, Emily made a decision. She called Rebecca. "I'm ready to meet him," Emily said into the phone. Her voice was steady, but inside, her stomach churned with uncertainty. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, as though processing the gravity of Emily's decision. "Are you sure, Emily? This is a big step." "I'm sure," Emily replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "But I need to do this. I need to know what he has to say." "I'll set up the meeting," Rebecca said. "I'll make sure it's on your terms." The meeting was set for the following Friday. Emily spent the next few days preparing herself, though she wasn't sure how anyone could truly prepare for something like this. She knew she was walking into a conversation that could either heal her heart or rip it open even more. She spent long hours at the shelter, trying to distract herself, but her mind kept drifting back to that day, the day when she would face her father once again. Friday came faster than she expected. She woke up early, staring at the ceiling as the sunlight filtered through the small window above her bed. The shelter was unusually quiet, the air heavy with tension. She felt like she was about to step into a storm. Her hands were clammy, her heart racing in anticipation. When Rebecca arrived at the shelter to pick her up, Emily felt a knot in her stomach tighten. It wasn't just about the meeting with her father. It was the fear of confronting her past. The fear that she might not be able to handle whatever emotions this encounter would stir up. Rebecca's car was a sleek black sedan, a sharp contrast to the gritty surroundings of the shelter. Emily climbed into the car, the door shutting behind her with a soft thud. The drive was quiet, the only sound the hum of the engine. Rebecca didn't try to make small talk. She knew this was an emotional journey for Emily, and she respected the silence. When they arrived at a small office building downtown, Emily's nerves shot through the roof. It wasn't an intimidating place, it was just an ordinary office building. But it felt like a million miles away from the shelter, from everything she had known over the last few weeks. Rebecca led her inside, through a narrow hallway, and into a small conference room where Emily's father was waiting. He was sitting at a table, his hands folded in front of him. He looked older than Emily remembered, grayer, more tired. But there was something about him, something vulnerable, that made Emily hesitate. She stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure whether she was ready to face him. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a brief second, she thought about turning around and walking out. But then she saw his eyes, sad, regretful, almost pleading. "Emily," he said softly, his voice rough. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Emily didn't respond immediately. She simply walked to the chair across from him and sat down, folding her arms tightly in front of her. "Why now?" she asked, her voice shaking. "After everything. Why now?" John looked down, his eyes full of guilt. "I wasn't sure how to fix things," he admitted. "I was afraid of what you might say. But I can't live with the guilt of not trying to make things right." Emily could feel the anger rising within her, but she held it in check. "You let Mom tear me apart. You just stood there. I needed you, and you weren't there." "I know," John whispered. "I failed you. And I can't undo that. But I want to be a part of your life again, Emily. If you'll let me." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of the past. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't ready to cry. She wasn't sure what she was ready for. "Do you really want to be here?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Or is this just guilt?" "I want to be here," John said firmly. "Not because I feel guilty, but because I love you. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it." Emily sat back in her chair, letting his words sink in. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe him, if only for a moment. It wasn't the perfect apology, but it was a start. "I don't know what this means," Emily said quietly, her voice trembling. "But maybe we can try. One step at a time." And for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Emily stared at her father across the table, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her chest. The conversation they had just started felt like it could last forever, or it could end in heartbreak. But something was different now. Something inside her was starting to change, even though she hadn't expected it to. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain, yet full of potential. The silence between them stretched on for a few seconds. Emily looked at her father, who was still watching her, waiting for her to speak. She could see the rawness in his eyes, the regret that had been buried so deep for so long. He had been a man who made mistakes, who was caught up in his own failures, but there was no denying that the pain he had caused her was real. And so was the apology that was slowly starting to form. "I don't know if I can ever forget what you did," Emily said quietly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can ever go back to the way things were. But I'm trying to understand. That you want to be here now." John nodded slowly, his face softening. "I know I can't change the past, and I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just want to be a part of your life again, if you'll let me." Emily's heart felt like it was in a vice. She had spent so many years building walls, convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, least of all her father. She had hardened herself to the idea of forgiveness, afraid that if she let him back in, he would only disappoint her again. But here he was, sitting across from her, pleading for a second chance. "Why now?" she asked, her voice still filled with skepticism. "Why didn't you try to fix things sooner? I was just a kid. I needed you." John's eyes filled with pain, but his voice remained steady. "I was selfish, Emily. I made a lot of mistakes. But I can't change what happened. All I can do now is try to make it right." Emily swallowed hard, feeling the anger and hurt that had simmered inside her for so long. She didn't know if she was ready to let all that go. But she was also tired of carrying that weight alone. Maybe it wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about learning how to move forward. She took a deep breath and looked at him again. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to see him as something other than the man who had abandoned her. She saw a man who was just as broken as she was, trying to pick up the pieces of his own life. "I don't know what the future holds," Emily said, her voice softening. "But I'm willing to try. Maybe we can start over." Slowly. John's face lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Emily. I promise, I won't mess this up. I'll do whatever it takes to show you I can be the father you need." The words hung in the air, like a promise that could either be broken or kept. But in that moment, Emily felt a sense of hope, fragile and tentative, but hope nonetheless. It was a chance. It wasn't a perfect beginning, and it certainly wouldn't be an easy one, but it was a start. That was enough for now. Later that evening, after they had left the office, Emily found herself walking alongside her father on the street, the cool evening air swirling around them. There was still a long road ahead, but it felt different now. The path seemed less lonely, less uncertain. "I'll be here," John said quietly, breaking the silence. "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." Emily nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She wasn't sure where this new chapter would lead, but she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had made peace with her past, and for the first time in a long time, she was willing to embrace the possibility of a future with her father. As they continued walking, Emily felt a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. It wasn't a clean break. It wasn't a perfect reunion. But it was real. It was honest. And it was enough. Back at the shelter later that night, Emily sat in her room, thinking about the events of the day. She had never imagined that a simple conversation could change everything, but it had. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca, asking how the meeting went. Emily smiled as she typed her response. "It was hard, but it was good. I'm going to take things one step at a time." And just like that, she felt the weight of the past lift a little bit more. There was still much to do. Much to heal. But for the first time, Emily felt like she wasn't walking this road alone. And that made all the difference.